Afternoon. I will call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. I'm the committee's chair, Robert Lilligren, joined by a quorum of the committee. So welcome. Thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate your attendance and your interest in our issues. Committee members, we have an agenda in front of us. I am going to recommend that we flip the information item so that the annual public housing agency plan would be our first information item, and then the voucher holder residential preference study would be our second info item. But I will put you on notice, I do want to allow us enough time to learn about the voucher holder residential preference study and maybe some time for discussion. And so I want to allow 20, 30 minutes, something like that. So I might be moving the agenda along a little more quickly. The non-consent items are all very fast items, and so I don't anticipate that taking a ton of time. So with that one change to the information items, reversing the order, we have an agenda before us, and unless there's objection from committee members, I will consider that approved. Any objections? Okay, great. We have an agenda. The next item is the approval of the September 5th, 2023 Community Development Committee minutes. Is there a motion?
Move the minutes as presented.
Thank you.
Second for August 25th.
Oh, is that,
Oh, September 5th,
September
you said.
5th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
cool, all right.
Jeez.
I'm really bad at dates, council members, so you
Yeah,
give me a
never
little bit
mind.
of a start. So September 5th, great. Any discussion, additions, or corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, that carries. Next is our one consent business item. It's the signature authorization for the state fiscal year 2024 and 2025 regional parks grant programs. Is there a motion to approve?
Move the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second? Great. Discussion, hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. We'll move on to the non-consent business items. The first is 2023-214. It's a project scope amendment for Agra transit-oriented development grant. And Nicole Clapp? Yeah, Ms. Clapp, welcome. I think you've got the first two, three
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot from me
non-consent
today.
items.
So hello, Chair Lilligren and council members of the Community Development Committee. My name is Nicole Clapp, and I'm the Acting Grants Manager for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services, Finance and Administration Unit. My pronouns are she, her. So the action up for your consideration today is that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Agra Transit-Oriented Development Grant Project Summary to reflect: 1, the removal of the hydroponic food production facility from the project; 2, changes to the project's FTEs and the number and level of affordable housing units; and 3, the change in developer. The revised project summary is attachment B of your business item, and we do have representatives from the City of Minneapolis and from the developer Wellington Management here today to answer any additional questions that you may have. Okay, so for some background on this grant, the City of Minneapolis was awarded a $1.25 million Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Grant in October of 2020 for the Agra project. The project was for a new affordable housing construction project along Franklin Avenue in the Seward neighborhood of South Minneapolis. The project was to include a development with a mix of sizes of affordable units at various levels of affordability and a greenhouse and growing facility to provide space for hydroponic food production, as well as a stormwater management system for reuse in the hydroponic system and/or site irrigation. This grant does not fund these activities directly, but rather funds site acquisition. Okay, so on to the request. On August 7th of 2023, the City of Minneapolis requested to amend multiple components of the grant. They explained that the original developer, Newport Partners, exited the project and Wellington Management had stepped in. During this transition, the project was reduced in size and the hydroponic operation was eliminated from the plan. This was due to increased construction costs and higher interest rates. However, the new developer worked hard to structure the project to include much larger and more deeply affordable housing units. To honor the intent of the original project, Wellington Management is pursuing a community-based food-related use for the smaller commercial space. So for the significance findings, the amendment request to remove the hydroponic operation constitutes the loss of a prominent feature of the project that was originally approved by the council. The request also reduces the density of affordable housing. These changes would have impacted scoring and are therefore deemed significant and require CDC approval. In the 2020 TOD program, there was a $2 million award limit per city. The city of Minneapolis submitted 3 applications, including Agra. Agra ranked second, and the other 2 applications ranked first and third. Those were, the number 1 was Minneapolis American Indian Center Expansion Project, and the number 3 project was Malcolm Yards. After fully awarding the first ranked project, Agra was partially funded to stay within that 2 million cap. In examining the rescoring of steps 1 and 2, this project would likely have been ranked third, and therefore been recommended for a smaller funding amount after fully funding the first and second ranked projects, which would have been American Indian Center and Malcolm Yards, which again were both City of Minneapolis projects. The second ranked project, Malcolm Yards, has recently been completed, and therefore there would be no opportunity to reallocate grant funds to that project now. The City of Minneapolis supports this amendment request, and the project's housing affordability changes have greater alignment with LCA priorities, specifically the inclusion of more project-based vouchers. 38 that were awarded by the Minneapolis Housing Authority and 8 Section 811 vouchers awarded by Minnesota Housing. In either case, the City of Minneapolis would have received the full $2 million available to them during this funding round. Given that, the staff recommendation is that the CDC approve the amendment as requested. So this slide just outlines some of the project details and gives you an idea of some of the changes to the various metrics that go into scoring for the projects. So as you can see, there's a significant increase in the deeply affordable units. So with that, the proposed action is therefore that, Mr. Chair, we ask that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Agra TOD Development Grant Summary to reflect, 1, the removal of the hydroponic food production facility from the project, 2, changes to the project's FTEs and the number and level of affordable housing units, and 3, change in the developer. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Clapp, for your report and for your work on this. And I have a hypothetical question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. But I'm just kind of interested because of the dynamic of what would have been the rankings had the project come forward as it's proposed today, and acknowledging that there was a project in competition for those funds, Malcolm Yards, as you pointed out, which you've been completed, so it's kind of a moot point at this time. But I know that there's another phase of a Malcolm Yards project, and I'm just wondering how that informs, or if it does inform at all, sort of future rounds. We've determined it likely would have been eligible for more funding in the previous round. So is that a consideration as we go forward?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate your question, and I would actually defer, sorry, Sarah, to put you on the spot, but to the LCA program manager, Sarah Berkey. She could speak a bit more to the scoring aspect
Cool.
of these
Thank you. Ms.
projects.
Berkey, welcome. Did you get my question, or?
Could you repeat it?
Sure. So this is about the dynamic of how the scores would have changed had the projects been proposed as we're looking at them today. And it's likely that the Agra project would have scored third. And so the Malcolm Yards project could have scored higher and have been awarded more funds. And so knowing that, and that's completed at this point, knowing there's another phase of that project coming up, I'm just wondering if there's any consideration that we give over rounds of applications for situations like this.
I would say my understanding, Chair Lilligren and committee members, is we don't have a mechanism for giving that
Sure.
consideration, but it's certainly something we could discuss.
Okay. Okay, well,
Yeah.
thanks. Thank you.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
Things change. Questions from committee members or, yeah, Councilmember Chambliss?
Yeah, I'm looking at the project details on page 3, affordable units. It looks like we have more at less than 30% AMI, which is good. But was the mix changed for the 30 to 50% AMI? So you could have more at less than 30%, or what's the logic there?
So the overall size of the development shrank. So there are fewer units overall, but with a greater emphasis towards those more deeply affordable units. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion or questions on this report? Further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Clapp proposes a series of actions to approve amending this transit-oriented development grant application. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
Just one more. I'm trying to understand why there is less housing units when the food facilities were removed.
Sure, so
Ms. Clapp.
thank you, Councilmember. I can speak to that, and I can also defer to the representatives from the city of Minneapolis and the developer. My understanding is that the overall project costs increased quite a bit, so they had to reduce the size of the development to make it still a viable project. But if either of our representatives want to add more context, I would invite
Any
them.
further comment from our friends from the city of Minneapolis? No one's jumping up, Ms. Clapp. Was that a satisfactory response, Councilmember?
Yes. thank
Great. So they had to shrink the overall costs. But I do say it's encouraging to see that the deeply affordable housing unit number increased. Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You spoke about the ranking within Minneapolis, but were there any other projects from other cities that didn't get funded that could have been?
No, because thank you, Councilmember, for your question. No, because Minneapolis ranked highest for the first 3 projects, and that wouldn't have changed, even with the rescoring of Agra. They still would have been the top 3 scoring projects.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Berkey, Ms. Clapp. We'll move on to 2023-215. It's the same project to amend the scope of the Agra tax-based revitalization account cleanup grant. Ms. Clapp.
Yes, thank you. So hello again, Chair
Hello.
Lilligren and council members. Again, my name is Nicole Clapp, Acting Grants Manager for CDMTS Finance and Admin Unit. So the action up for your consideration today will sound fairly familiar. This is a TBRA grant this time, but also for Agra. So the proposal is to approve reducing the net tax capacity, removing the hydroponic food production facility from the project, changing the project's FTEs and the number and level of affordable units, and also extending the term of the grant by 1 year. The revised project summary for this grant is attachment B in your business item. And once again, we do have representatives from the city and the developer here, should you have any questions for them. So for some background on this grant specifically, the city of Minneapolis was awarded a $378,000 livable communities tax-based revitalization account contamination cleanup grant in July of 2021 for the Agra project. The project was for cleanup of a 1-acre site along Franklin Avenue in the Seward neighborhood of South Minneapolis. The project was to include, as should be familiar now, a development with a mix of sizes of affordable units at various levels of affordability, and a greenhouse and growing facility to provide space for the hydroponic food production, as well as a stormwater management system for reuse in the hydroponic system and/or site irrigation. This grant was to fund Phase 2 environmental site assessment, development of a response action plan, asbestos survey, transport and disposal of contaminated soil, and related environmental oversight. So on to the request. On August 14th, 2023, the City of Minneapolis requested to amend multiple components of the grant. They explained that the original developer, Newport Partners, exited the project and Wellington Management had stepped in. During this transition, again, the project was reduced in size and the hydroponic operation was eliminated from the plan. This was due to increased construction costs and higher interest rates. The estimated net tax capacity increase was reduced in large part due to the unforeseen decrease to the 4D property classification rate for affordable properties from 0.75% to 0.25% that occurred during the 2023 legislative session. However, the new developer worked hard to structure the project to include much larger and more deeply affordable housing units, as mentioned before. And to honor the intent of the original project, Wellington Management is pursuing a community-based food-related use for the smaller commercial space. For the significance findings, the amendment request to reduce the net tax capacity is considered substantial according to the LCA grant policy for TBRA because it is greater than 20% and therefore requires approval by the Community Development Committee. The other components of the changes don't require CDC approval for this specific grant, but I just outlined them for clarity. Had the original application included the lower net tax capacity, the project would have received an evaluation score of 87 and would still have been recommended for funding in the May 2021 TBRA funding cycle. Given this, council staff recommends the amendment be approved as requested. It is worth noting for the committee as well that this change to the net tax capacity will impact other grants as well. So we may be back before the committee with a future potentially information item just to discuss the impact of other awarded grants that will have a reduced net tax capacity as well. Okay, so this slide just goes over some of the project details, outlining some of the changes in affordable units, gives you information on that net tax capacity reduction, and the use of funds has not changed at all. It still is the same items, the same grant award. So therefore, Mr. Chair, we ask that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Agra TBRA Contamination Cleanup Grant project summary to reflect, 1, the reduced net tax capacity, 2, the removal of the hydroponic food production facility from the project, 3, changes to the project's FTEs and the number and level of affordable housing units, and 4, to extend the term of the grant by 1 year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Clapp. I just have one quick question, and then I'll turn to committee members, please. And just going back to your comment, Ms. Clapp, that because of the 2023 legislative changes in the tax classification of 4D, so that is lower, so we're not going to capture as much tax value as we had hoped on those properties, and so that's going to cause some kind of reverberation through some of our other awards, correct? Am I understanding that? Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure I was getting it. Thanks. Discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks. And I had the same question, so I'm glad you asked it. But the other question is related to the use of the commercial space, which obviously is significantly reduced without using that hydroponic garden. So did you get information on what they might be proposing for that type of commercial space? I know it has a food purpose. Is it a garden, or is it going to be cooking, or what's that?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. I do not have specific information, but I would defer to Cameron, I believe, in the back from Wellington Management, may be able to speak to more specifically what some of the ideas are for that commercial space.
Great, thank you. Welcome. Yeah, please introduce yourself for the record.
Cameron Olson with Wellington Management. Could you repeat your question,
Yes,
Councilmember?
I was just asking, with the reduction of the square footage for the commercial space, it is going to have some sort of food use?
Correct.
So is that going to be a garden? Is it going to be used to cook, or what type of use would it be?
Our hopes is to be a local grocer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Yeah, further discussion, Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that I'm really pleased to read about the asbestos study. It's an important issue for me. I spent a good chunk of the last 20 years advocating at mostly the federal level, but some at the state level, on issues related to asbestos and an attempt to get it banned, which it is not yet. September 26th of each year is an asbestos day nationwide. Not many people know that, and not many people know that it has not yet been banned in this country. One of the few civilized nations that hasn't been smart enough to get it banned. And I also want to note that it is present in more things than many of us think. We tend to think of Navy shipyards. We tend to think of pipe fitters and those careers and industries as being where the greatest exposure is. One of the areas where there is a significant exposure to asbestos is our schools, hospitals, dormitories, places where people go to get well, to be educated, and not to be exposed to a lethal risk. Not everybody exposed to asbestos is going to get sick and die from it, but if you know of anybody who has, it is just a horrific way to live and to die. So I hope that we continue in our region to really push asbestos surveys and that we do it in as many places as possible so that we can mitigate the risk that people are faced with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, for your comments and for your work on the issue. Further discussion? Hearing none, before I call for a motion, I just want to note that I work very, very near this site, and this will be very welcome to see ground broken, and even my organization was in some conversations about possibly partnering with the farming, agriculture or something, and I'm very supportive of the changes in the scope. But I will note to committee members and to everyone, if you wanna really see how our dollars are sort of leveraging each other, this is just a few blocks from the Minneapolis American Indian Center, which was the #1 scoring project of that round. It's in full disclosure, I'm on the Minneapolis American Indian Center Capital Campaign Committee, but it's about, I don't know, 3/4 finished maybe, planning to open in May of 2024. And you can just see how transformational these funds have been on East Franklin on the American Indian Cultural Corridor. So I'm happy to support this today. Ms. Clapp brings forward a series of recommendations, proposed actions, amending the Agra tax-based revitalization account contamination cleanup grant. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Thank you. Thank you. Council members, any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nelson,
Thank
for
you.
being here. Yeah. And our next is still Ms. Clapp. It's the 2023-216 amendment of the project scope and grant-funded activities of Columbia Heights Livable Communities Demonstration Account Grant. Ms. Clapp.
Thank you again, Chair Lilligren and council members. I won't introduce myself a third time, you know. So the action up for your consideration today is that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Columbia Heights Affordable Housing and Community Community Food Site LCDA Development Grant Project Summary to remove the community food site from the project and reduce the grant award and grant funded activities associated with that portion of the project. The revised project summary is attachment B of your business item. So for some background on this grant, the City of Columbia Heights was awarded a $1.232 million Livable Communities Demonstration Account development grant in January 2022 for the Affordable Housing and Community Food Site Project. The grant was to fund stormwater management, site preparation, placemaking spaces, community engagement, and architectural and engineering fees for a mixed-use development project that was to include an affordable housing building and a separate food shelf building. On to the request. On August 17th, 2023, the City of Columbia Heights requested an amendment to reflect the food shelf organization, Southern Anoka Community Assistance or SACA's exit from the project and subsequent reduction of grant deliverables. They explain that with SACA's exit, the second phase of the project would no longer be completed. The affordable housing aspect of the project, however, is moving forward unchanged. For the significance review, the amendment request to remove the community food site constitutes the removal of a prominent component of the project originally approved by the council. The request to reduce the grant award by $412,000 constitutes a 33% change in the project budget, and committee approval is required for any budget shift over 20%. Program staff determined that rescoring would have been administratively burdensome and wasn't guaranteed to produce an accurate result given the scale of the change to this project. Because the affordable housing component of the project is moving forward unchanged, and the grantee was able to clearly delineate the funding attributed to the affordable housing and community food site respectively, they requested the award be reduced accordingly. This allows the grant to fund only the affordable housing portion of the project, and the released funds will become available for a future funding round. Therefore, council program staff recommends the amendment be approved as requested. So this is just some detail about the changes being requested. So you can see that the stormwater management and the site preparation activities will continue with slightly reduced budgets for just the affordable housing component of the project, while the last three items will no longer be completed. Therefore, Mr. Chair, we ask that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Columbia Heights Affordable Housing and Community Food Site Project LCDA Development Grant Project Summary to 1, remove the community food site from the project scope, 2, reduce the project FTEs, 3, remove grant-funded activities, and 4, decrease the total grant award to $820,000. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Clapp. And I just have a quick question, and I'll turn to committee members as well, or part of it's, I guess, more of a comment, but I guess the question part is, the housing component of this project is completed, right? They received their certificate of occupancy in June, right? So, yeah, thank you for that. And it's clear from the letter that's included in our packet that the City of Columbia Heights, this change is at no fault of the City of Columbia Heights. They seemed disappointed that the Southern Anoka Community Assistance Program had to back out of this project. So it's just not a perfect situation all around, and we're trying to respond as best we can. Questions, Councilmember Chambliss?
Yeah, it is kind of disappointing that the placemaking space was dropped, as well as, I'm not sure what the community engagement involved, if that was marketing, because that's a small amount, so I'm assuming it was not related to the space, maybe the placemaking space, but it would be nice if they somehow had room to expand. Do you know if they have room to expand in the future through a potential later grant?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. The parcel that the community food site was going to be located on is still available for potential future development. And my understanding is that the city is looking at future options for development of that space. That's what made this easy to delineate, because it was two separate parcels, but the other one is as yet undeveloped.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter?
Thank you. The question was the same, whether in fact the city would be able to, along with other partners, look at a future development. I also noted that due to the change, the original partner is also unable to continue a thrift store. I'm hoping that in consideration of a new project, that would also be a part of potential future development, at least considered to be a part of that. Just a comment, I realize you don't have the answer to that. It's unfortunate, what's happening with food here,
Yeah, two projects in a row.
It's so unfortunate to see that coming out of the project. But the affordable housing, of course, is still needed, and to support that with other opportunities as well. So thank you.
Ms. Clapp, any comment or?
No,
Okay,
thank you,
great. Thank
Councilmember.
you. Further discussion on the report? If not, Ms. Clapp has proposed a series of actions to amend the Columbia Heights Affordable Housing Community Food Site Livable Communities Demonstration Account Grant. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Clapp. You get a break now. Yeah, thank you. We'll move into our fourth non-consent business item, which is to establish a public hearing date for the Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is a fast-moving application when you consider the speed of the federal government especially. And so we're kind of moving along as many, approving what we can, but we have to set this public hearing and have hold the public hearing, if I understand it correctly, before we actually submit the application. So Ms. Berkey is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Berkey.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren and committee members. I'm Sarah Berkey, the Senior Manager for Livable Communities and Housing Policy. So yes, we have an opportunity to apply for a new program offered by HUD called Pro Housing, Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing. And the NOFO came out recently. The program is intended to empower communities actively taking steps to remove barriers to affordable housing and seeking to increase housing production and lower housing costs for families over the long term. A lot of the barriers that HUD describes in this notice of opportunity relate to land use policy, but also other kinds of support for development. So we thought it was an interesting opportunity, and several other jurisdictions within the metro area were also interested in it. Because we are a metropolitan planning organization for the region, we can apply for the region. And so we're talking with partners in the region about a collaborative effort on this project with the Metropolitan Council as the applicant. In order to submit an application, we need to make a draft application available for public comment for a 15-day period and to hold a public hearing. So that's why we're here today, to ask you to consider establishing a date to conduct that public hearing at the October 2nd, 2023 Community Development Committee meeting. And we could discuss and receive comment at that time on the proposal, and we would also come back to you at the next committee meeting after that to share the full proposal and ask for your support in submitting it to HUD.
Thank you, Ms. Berkey. And just to be crystal clear, and I know this is moving really quickly, and I really commend you, Director Barajas, and your teams for being able to be this nimble, that we can take advantage of this and support the entire metro region in this application. And so just, again, to be really clear, we do not have the application yet, right? Correct?
To review? No.
To review, right. But we're setting the public hearing. We will have it by then, right? And I just want to be really transparent about that. We're moving quickly on this, which, good. I support that. So, Councilmember Carter.
Just to clarify, I know that the draft is not yet available. It will be on October 2nd. As the chair just said, the public comment period closes on October 10th. How does that reckon with the amount of time that draft should be available for review, comment? The fact is, we don't have the comment before the public hearing, and then it appears to be open for less time than perhaps it would normally be. Can you just square that in my head?
Ms. Berkey.
Yes, Councilmember Carter, Chair Lilligren. The intention is that the full application would be available for public review on September 26th so that we can meet the timeline. And then for 15 days, including the 26th, that would be the public comment period. And then the public hearing would happen in the middle of that time. So folks could submit comments in the public hearing or just send them in writing.
Okay.
It's our best
All right.
attempt to meet the
It is open for
requirements.
15
Yes,
days, right?
yes,
And
yes.
that meets the letter of the law. It doesn't give us the opportunity to have a summary before we release or submit the grant. For us to hear the summary.
Yes.
Correct.
So, Councilmember Carter, the intention is with closing the public comment period in general to accept comments until October 10th for that 15-day period, that would allow us to quickly summarize the comments, incorporate any feedback that we can incorporate from them, and then come to the October 16th meeting of this committee with a report on all of that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councilmember. Further discussions or questions, Councilmember Chambliss?
Just to clarify, before October 16th, when we get the report of the public comments, that will also include staff recommendations on the programmatic aspects?
Ms. Berkey?
Yes, Councilmember Chambliss, we would summarize all the comments received and any, response that staff recommends making to them or any changes that we would propose making to the application after everyone has reviewed it and before you would sign off on the submission of the application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Barajas, did you want to add something? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, I would add that this is unusual in that usually we come to you without having to hold a public hearing. We get to talk to you about the program. We get to have worked out some sort of concept of what we'd like to do. And given the timeline of deadline submittal by October 30th, it put a squeeze on how do we hold these conversations and when do we have them? We certainly would welcome your feedback too, and when you see that draft, once we have that available, if there's, I know for council members who've been around for some time as well, you've heard about what communities have shared with you during their planning process for the housing policy work, obstacles that they've encountered. Those are some of the things that we've been thinking about building off of what communities have been telling us are issues that they're encountering, things that they don't have staff time to accomplish, and other things so that we can make the best use of all of the funds that will be made available to local units of government here in the coming year with this new sales tax for local housing.
Thank you, Director Barajas. And I would just note, I guess you don't need defending, but in advance of step, HUD was already discussing this program, and then they published the deadline, application deadline, which I think, was a little surprising and quick. And so, again, I commend our staff for being able to respond. And Ms. Berkey, do we know what we're going to apply for yet? I mean, I know we can go up to 10 million, right? So do we know what our requested amount's going to be?
Yes, Chair Lilligren, we're considering a $10 million request. Might as well try for it. And then splitting that into categories of eligible activities that would include planning and policy and development and possibly preservation and infrastructure as the other eligible activity.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Berkey proposes that the Metropolitan Council establish a date to conduct a public hearing at the October 2nd, 2023 Community Development Committee meeting to discuss and receive comment on a grant application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing program. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Bento.
I wasn't going to bring this up, but yesterday, I believe it was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times, and if it was in the Washington Post, there's a good chance it was also in the Star Tribune. There was an article about the Wall Street buy-up of middle-class housing in a lot of cities, and they cited a neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the impact that this trend, I hope it's a short-lived trend, is having on affordable housing is just horrific. And I think we as a committee and the council needs to talk about the issue and work with our state and federal legislative delegations as to how we can influence the future of that in our region and in our state, because it's devastating, and it affects families, so.
Thank you for those comments. Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I just kind of quickly went to the pro-housing site, and it gave a little bit more details about how to approach the barriers to housing. One was, giving ideas or support for updating outdated zoning and land use policies, focusing on improving inefficient procedures, addressing gaps in available resources for development, deteriorating or inadequate infrastructure, lack of neighborhood amenities, challenges to preserving existing housing stock, such as increasing threats from natural hazards, redevelopment pressures, or expiring affordability requirements. So I think it's a very nice list and will help our municipalities overcome these barriers.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that's a really apt observation. And as Ms. Berkey said as well, it'll bring resources into our regional ecosystem that we can use to support communities that may sometimes struggle or have difficulties establishing those policies or investments and removing the barriers. So I think it's good for the region. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Ricker. We look forward to the public hearing on the 2nd and watching this application process. So that concludes our business items for this meeting. We'll move on to our information items. And as we announced at the top of this meeting, we've switched the order so we can talk about the annual public housing agency plan and the continued discussion of public comments. And we did that in respect of our visitors here so they don't have to sit through a whole meeting if they so choose. So we will move on to we appreciate your being here. We appreciate your advocacy. We're going to pick up where we left off at the last Community Development Committee meeting where we got a lot of data, which was very helpful, and we had to sort of abridge our discussion. So today we want to give plenty of time for discussion, and then as I marked earlier, I would like to make sure we hold time for the voucher holder residential preference study discussion as well for tonight. So I will welcome Ms. Paulson, Ms. Smith, to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Terri Smith. I'm the Director of the Council's Housing Authority, Metro HRA, and I'm here with my friend and colleague Stephanie Paulson, who is the Assistant Director and has done much of the work on this Public Housing Agency Plan, and so we're going to sort of tag team today. Our goal today is to continue our discussion, as you indicated, from 2 weeks ago, where we provided lots and lots of data that took a long time, so I'm hoping that if you weren't at that meeting, you were able to view it. And do have the slides in case we need to refer back to some of that. But we're really going to just reflect on the public comments we received and hope to have a deep dive conversation with you all to gain some input on our policies going forward. I have 3 short slides just to set the stage. As you know, you've seen this slide numerous times. Pretty soon you'll be able to recite it to us. But as you know, the Metro HRA provides rent assistance to about 7,200 households in the region. The Metro HRA service area is outlined on this map. So we serve all blue areas, so all of Carver County, all of Anoka County, and then suburban Hennepin and Ramsey. All the areas in white on this map have their own Section 8 programs and their own vouchers. We serve almost 100 communities in 2022. We distributed almost $80 million in housing assistance payments to about 1,400 private landlords. So as you know, the Metro HRA wrong slide. Metro HRA is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to submit a public housing agency plan each year. This plan describes the HRA programs, goals, and strategies for meeting the needs of low-income persons in the region in the coming year. This document and its attachments were part of a public hearing or the subject of a public hearing on August 21st before this committee, and then is the discussion of our item today. The Housing Choice Voucher, which is the Housing Authority's main policy document and the document that provides us direction on our day-to-day operations, is also an attachment to the Public Housing Agency Plan and was subject to the public hearing as well. But it contains all the mandatory and discretionary policies for program operation in the Metro HRA and was also posted for public review. So this is a snapshot of where we have been and where we're going. So we were at the Committee of the Whole on August 2nd with an overview of the Public Housing Agency Plan process, including information on the administrative plan and the project-based voucher program. On August 21st, we held the public hearing here at this committee. The public comment period was open through August 31st. On September 5th, we had an initial discussion with you that was quite lengthy on the public comments we received in the PHA plan process, and we're here today to continue that discussion. We'll be back to you in 2 weeks with an action item, a proposed action item for your approval of the Public Housing Agency plan in the attachments, which will then hopefully receive full council approval on October 11th. That document is due to the feds, so the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on October 15th. So we don't have much cushion in that timeline. So today, as Council or Chair Lilligren indicated, the subject of tonight's conversation is to continue our discussion from 2 weeks ago on the public comments received. We're hoping that we can go through all of the slides first and then take questions at the end, hoping that we can have the robust discussion on all of the policy recommended changes all at one time at the end, if that works for you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So the Metro HRA received 31 comments during the public comment period. They were all from Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative and their affiliates, and all requesting the same policy and action changes. And they are listed here on this slide. And so we have a slide on each one of these, but in overview, the public comment request is that we utilize 30% of our vouchers as project-based vouchers. That we increase the PBV access, so make project-based vouchers available across the entire 7-county metro area. That we partner with Minnesota Housing on our request for proposals process for project-based vouchers. That we allow additional time and hold PBVs open for a longer period of time to incentivize capital funding, and then that we utilize the project-based option with the new statewide rent assistance program. So the first request is that we utilize 30% of our vouchers as project-based vouchers. So to give you the current state, the current policy, and the administrative plan is that the council will project base up to 20% of its vouchers. Staff did not make a recommended change to that policy. Our current status with our project-based vouchers is that 14% of vouchers are currently project-based. So that is 978 vouchers. There are 389 vouchers that remain with the ability to project-base before we get to that 20%. Want to make clear, as the project-based portion of vouchers increases, the number of vouchers attached to people or tenants decreases. So there's an up and down situation with these vouchers. We do not get additional vouchers from the feds for project basing. We have an annual voucher turnover rate of about 532 vouchers, and that's a 3-year average. So that's the number of vouchers that we're working with that need to fill a variety of purposes, including waiting list applicants or admissions from the waiting list, initially filling project-based voucher units that come online. As you will recall from a few weeks ago, once a project-based voucher tenant has lived in the unit for 12 months, they can request a tenant-based voucher to move to a location of their choice. So it includes those vouchers that are given to current PBV occupants. It includes absorbing vouchers from other housing authorities. So we went into this a little bit at the last meeting, but when someone moves to Metro HRA service area from another service area, we have the ability to either absorb that voucher into our own program, which takes a turnover voucher, or we bill that other housing authority. We're billing for 900 vouchers right now. It's near impossible to keep up for our staff. It's a lot of billing that goes back and forth. So we don't want to utilize our vouchers for absorbing, but we need to relieve some of the billing. And then the other thing I just want to say on that before I go to the next part of the comment is that I'm not going to review all the data provided at the last meeting, but I do want to point out that in terms of how we've used the turnover vouchers in past years, in 2021, 23% of our turnover vouchers went to project-based vouchers, so either initially filling the units or movers, and only 4% 4% went to the waiting list. And that's because we had an overabundance of absorbing vouchers. We weren't able to do much absorbing during the first year of the pandemic, nor were other housing authorities around the country. So we were playing catch up in 2021. So we ended up absorbing hundreds and hundreds of vouchers, which impacted our ability to serve the waiting list. We made a commitment to the project-based voucher, so we didn't have a choice. The feds say that we must prioritize PBV movers before serving the waiting list. So that's why 23% went to PBVs, 4% to the waiting list. In 2022, 35% of turnover vouchers went to project-based vouchers and only 18% to the waiting list. So though we had a little bit more service to the waiting list, you can see that most of the turnover vouchers in 2022 also went to the project-based voucher program. In terms of the public comment request, which is to project-based up to 30% of the vouchers, we have some things on this slide for you to consider. And one of them is pretty straightforward, but worth mentioning, that why change to 30% when the 20% mark has not been met yet. And in order to get to the 20% mark in the next year, 2, 3, we would have to commit most of our turnover vouchers to project basing in order to make that happen. The other thing I will mention, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, is that today, because we have enough turnover vouchers, we don't have vouchers sitting over here on the shelf waiting for project basing. We're relying on that steady stream of turnover vouchers. If we get too many project-based vouchers, and I don't know what that number is because I don't have a crystal ball, but there will be a time where we are shelving vouchers to make sure that we have vouchers available when PBV developments come online. And then I think the other thing worth mentioning is that once we hit the max, which is 30%, at this point, PBV is no longer a resource. So the max is the max, and that's the cap on the project-based voucher program unless the feds change the rules on that. And then I think the other big thing is that it will prevent completion of other work plan items. And I went into some of that at the last meeting. It's not like if we do more PBV, we're not going to do a home ownership program. It's just all of these things collectively take time, and it will impact our ability to complete other work plan items. I think we have a question, Mr. Chair.
Did you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait?
Well, it's just a
Councilmember
comment.
Chambliss.
Maybe just slowing down a little bit. It's a lot of information to do compare and contrast. I guess what helps me is maybe a slightly different format, because it's hard to compare what's happened over time in this kind of a graphic. It might be helpful to see maybe some graphics, and maybe I missed that and didn't go all the way down to the bottom, but that would just be helpful. It's a lot of information to absorb, especially if people aren't doing this every day. And I want to make sure I understand it well enough to be able to weigh in and make some really good policy decisions.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Maybe I need to be quicker thinking,
Well,
I'm not
no,
sure,
yeah,
but.
it is a lot of information. Anything voucher related or is really technical, right? And so we have staff that's really adept in the technical part. This is a little bit of review. I mean, we've seen the comments before, but yeah, your point is well taken. This is a lot of data and it's very technical. Ms. Smith?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I think our last meeting, I don't remember how long this presentation went, but it was maybe an hour and a half. And so we provided a ton of data at that meeting. So we had a request from a council member to start where we left off. So that was my goal today. So I don't have all that data built in here, although it was in all of the previous presentations. And so I, but I get it. It's hard for me to absorb, and I work with this every day. And there's a lot that goes into this. It's not like one chart is going to help make a decision. It's all of the information we provided over the last 4 meetings or so and information. So we don't have that chart here. If I could try to provide an overview of the PBV awards, over the last 10 years, we've had some charts in previous presentations of that. I don't know where Mr. Chair, you recommend I go at this
Yeah,
point?
so, and committee members, I apologize if we're moving too quickly, and it was my request that we sort of pick up where we left off last cycle, just because it was a long meeting, and I really want to get to the conversation and the discussion, and so a lot of those charts or that data is included in the packet for the last Community Development Committee meeting, but I want to move at the pace that we can move at, but I would just refer back to the timeline where we must submit a plan to HUD by October 15th. We don't have an option there. So that's kind of the end game, and we can move in a logic model backward from that, but that's the timeline we're running up against, and so.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
please.
For this first item, I think the bottom line on this issue is most of our vouchers, 86% are attached to people, and 14% are attached to specific units within the community, and those are in 55 PBV developments and 978 units. If we're going to attach more to specific units, we're taking them from people who currently have choice in where they live, and we're attaching them to units. And so there's a balancing effort, and certainly PBVs are a tool that can help developers get additional funding points when they go in to Minnesota Housing for things like tax credits or other public financing. PBVs are not the only tool, and every development that is awarded PBVs is not going to get funded at the state because there's not enough funding. And so PBVs are not going to solve the affordable housing crisis and allow the region to build all the extremely low-income units that are needed. It's not a big enough resource to make that happen. And so what input we're looking from you all is, where do you want us to prioritize our work? And so I think that's what this item is about. If we're going to get to 30% PBV as requested in the public comments, it's going to take more staffing capacity that we have, it's going to take more resources that we have, and it's going to take more vouchers that we have. And so I think what I'm hoping that we can provide enough information to you all so that you can help us decide what that percentage is and how much you want us to prioritize the offer and award of PBVs over other work plan items. And so I feel like that's sort of what this slide is about. Director Barajas, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Oh, thank you, Terry. No, I think you captured it well.
Thank you. Yes, ready to move on? Yeah, Councilmember Carter.
As long as we've broken for a minute, could I slowly ask the question? And for your, as best you can, explanation to us. We know that we are at 14% now in terms of the award of PBVs, and we can allocate up to 20%. Could you, in a, maybe brief 3 to 4 sentences, share your perspective on why we have not been able to reach or have not yet reached the 20%?
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Carter, that's a really good question. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think what has happened is all of the competing priorities of serving people on the waiting list, absorbing vouchers from other agencies, of filling PBV turnover units, and those sorts of things. It's just, I think it's about trying to balance all of those and trying to make sure that people on the waiting list are served before they hit 5, 6, 7, 10 years on the waiting list. And I think the longest period of time we've ever had people waiting on the waiting list was 5 years. And I don't think it's a good idea to get there, for people to be waiting on a waiting list for a voucher for 5 years that may be applied, and we're at just over a year now with our new waiting list. But waiting 5 years for a voucher, and then someone that moves into a project-based voucher unit doesn't come from the waiting list in most cases, So they're just getting moved into assisted housing where someone on the waiting list is waiting 5 years. And so I think it's just trying to compete with all of these competing demands and make, as someone in the audience just said, poor people against poor people. I think that was the comment.
I understand the
and
comments
so-
that you've made.
So I don't know that there's a good answer. I wish I could articulate it. It's all quantifiable, but it's just not. I mean, if we want to prioritize getting to 20% in the next however many years, if you look, we have 389 to get to 20%. And we have an average of 500, give or take, some vouchers turnover in a year. And it's,
I
don't
appreciate
know.
all the variety of reasons. It's difficult to think about people waiting and waiting 5 years. It's difficult to think about anybody waiting a long period of time, whether they're coming in as an individual or whether they're coming in to a project. I don't know that we know as much about the wait, on the project side. We know there's great need everywhere. But I appreciate your articulating just some of the pushes and pulls that you're observing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I guess we're going to stop for some questions and discussion. I would just get in, without the deep expertise of Ms. Smith or Ms. Paulson, maybe I could just make statements in ignorance.
Yeah, do
But for
that.
me, for sitting here for 4.5 years, I would say part of that, this balance between PVBs and tenant-based vouchers really is a reflection of our policy priority of housing choice, right? That the individual tenants can choose the communities they want to live in. And so we don't anchor them to an individual project. And I think that, and these guys aren't shaking their heads, but they're not nodding their heads either, but I think that influences the fact that of where we kind of are in project-based vouchers. It was kind of our policy. So I have Councilmember Lindstrom, Councilmember Vento, and Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. Just a couple minutes ago, you gave a couple of statistics that I don't think I heard when we last met a couple of weeks ago about how most turnover vouchers, the 532 three-year average, most turnover vouchers go to PBVs. Could you give those stats? I was trying to write as fast as I could, but I didn't quite catch all of them, and I think it was a really important couple of numbers there.
Councilmember, or Chair Lindstrom, or Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Lindstrom. Yes, in 2021, 23% of turnover vouchers went to project-based vouchers and 4% to the waiting list. In 2022, 35% of PBVs, or 35% of turnover vouchers went to PBVs and 18% to the waiting list. I provided the numbers on that at the last meeting. I didn't do the percentages. So this time I just broke it down into percentages, and I'm hot, so I'm just going to take my jacket off. So excuse me for that.
Thank you.
And for community members, I will note that there was a graphic, a bar chart that represented this in the packet for the last CDC meeting. Is that it, Councilmember Lindstrom?
That's it.
Cool, thank you. Councilmember Vento, then Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to comment to the comment about us putting poor people versus poor people. That's not the intent. That's not what this is about. Everybody sitting in this room is committed to housing. Let's not forget that. We're committed to housing for people at all levels of poverty. We're dealing with a very difficult situation with very limited resources from the state and federal level. We're not certain yet what we're going to get from the state level. So to suggest that our two staff and or any of us sitting up here are trying to pit poor people against poor people, no, we are not. I'm wearing a button with a little heart on it that says all. When I drive home tonight and go in my driveway, there'll be a little sign that's been sitting in my front lawn for a long time, and it says, "We're all in this together." I had that sign up through COVID, and I'm not taking it down because I don't think we're through the worst of the divisiveness in our country. I also frequently reflect on the wisdom of Paul Wellstone when he said, we all do better when we all do better. We all do better when we all do better, and we're all in this together, are like prayers. And all of us are working hard to solve this problem. So I hope that when this conversation ends tonight, I hope as we go forward, we can keep all of that in mind. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, to me, it's an annual plan. It's not supposed to be a major change, but we're finding a balance between these different uses. And currently, we're using more turnover vouchers for project-based than we are for the tenant-based ones. And so I don't see a reason to make a big shift this year, especially when we have information coming out at some point in the near future, I would hope, on the state program. And if we're lucky, maybe the state program won't be quite so onerous on the record-keeping stuff that goes with project-based vouchers, because there's a lot of stuff that's unrelated to the actual housing that has to be calculated for the project-based vouchers under the federal system, if I'm understanding what you guys said last time correctly. So to me, the place to look for any change is with that new pot of money. Not only that, but they're sending money to counties and to cities as well. And it's substantial amounts of money that will be going to those entities. And to me, that's the place to be looking for the money to build buildings. And we still need to just keep having a balance in what we have. I don't support going outside of the area of this program because, I don't represent the part that's in the Metro HRA, but we're administering these vouchers for those elected officials and whatnot who decided they didn't want to do them in-house. We're administrators. If we're going to make a big difference on how we're going to do things like going outside of their area, we should weigh in with those people who actually control these vouchers and say, do you want us to spread them out to other parts of the metro? Because I have the Dakota County CDA and Scott County to figure out what they want to do in terms of project-based whatever, whether it's vouchers or they just put in money or whatever. I have that in my area, and that's the right of those jurisdictions to decide what they want to do with their resources. But I don't support taking resources from the Metro HRA area without the permission of the elected officials there to go to other parts of the metro. I mean, we're nitpicking over little things and stuff, and I thank you, Councilmember Vento, for your comments on affordable housing. I take people into my house that don't have a place to live. I've had a lot of people that I'm not related to live in my house, including a gang member from Milwaukee for 6 months. So I'm not afraid to help people who need help, but we're administering a program for a subsection of the metro, and I try to keep very conscious of that. That is what we're doing. This is not ours. We're administrators, and I'm trying to do it as fairly as possible in the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think it's a great lead into the next slide, which is about the geographic approach. Ms. Smith. Ms. Paulson.
Good afternoon, Chair Lilligren and council members. My name is Stephanie Paulson, Assistant Director with Metro HRA. It's nice to see you all again, and I will take the next handful of slides. And like you said, Chair Lilligren, it's kind of a perfect segue. One of the comments that we received in our public comment period was to make PBVs available across the entire region. And as a reminder, Metro HRA service area is defined in Minnesota statute. There are currently no other PBVs in the region award PBVs outside of their service area. Metro HRA has a large program due to our large service area. So we have 96 communities in our service area. That's kind of a strange shade of bluish gray on your map. And that the Metro HRA service area actually contains 41% of our region's population. And so it's about 1.3 million. In context, Minneapolis is about 436,000, 13% of our region's population, and St. Paul is 310-ish, about 10% of the region's populations. So when we're thinking about the big three, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Metro, we in fact serve the greatest percentage of our region's population in those 4 counties. The change to Metro HRA's PBV scoring criteria and prioritizing PBVs in our service area first was adopted in the 2020 administrative plan. Staff recommended this policy change because both competition and demand for PBVs had grown incredibly. And the Metro HRA just wanted to ensure that the 96 communities in our jurisdiction had also competitive access to the resources, since that's our primary service area defined in statute.
I'm sorry, Ms. Paulson, before you move on, I just want to be really crystal clear on this. So we don't award, no HRA is awarding PVBs outside of their jurisdictions, but it's not forbidden, or but it does dilute the number of vouchers within our HRA boundaries, correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you, thanks.
I wonder if I could clarify one thing, Mr. Chair. The Metro HRA has a handful of PBVs awarded in Washington County and Plymouth that we awarded prior to 2020 when the policy was changed. And I think since at that point and since then, PBVs have become incredibly competitive. And then we've had some internal discussions about there's a reason our service area is outlined in statute. This is what we were developed to serve.
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and committee members, the third point as a theme of public comments was to coordinate PBV awards with MHFA's kind of super RFP. So right now, current PHA policy in our administrative plan is that we have basically the authority in the administrative plan to offer PBVs in 2 ways. Advertise the availability of PBVs through an RFP process prior to MHFA's RFP process, or to advertise the availability of units in conjunction or concurrent with MHFA's process. Metro HRA has heard overwhelmingly from developers in listening sessions and in opportunities for feedback that offering prior to the award is the preferred process, and Metro HRA has no intention of changing kind of the standard operating procedure that we do. We've received great feedback. That being said, it is the agency's belief and the HRA's belief that if we remove the language about offering PBVs in conjunction with MHFA's annual RFP process, we're becoming unnecessarily restrictive. So kind of an example we were trying to think through is, let's say the state rental assistance guidance comes out, and it isn't necessarily prior to, with timings of RFPs and all those things, we aren't able to offer PBVs prior to the MHFA process. But we're able to do something concurrently or outside of standard timelines. That separate kind of bullet in our PHA policy allows us to have some flexibility in saying if we take it out, we can really only offer and award PBVs in one way. By having that second bullet in there, it allows us to have some flexibility. Knowing that, like I said, overwhelmingly we have heard from developers, not just the developer who participated in our public comment period, but other developers, that's the preferred way of the Metro HRA offering PBV proposals as prior to MHFA's annual RFP. So in practice, we don't want to change it, and in policy, we'd like to keep the second bullet in there. And Mr. Chair and committee members, the fourth theme of 5 that we're going to talk about today is about multi-year PBV award, kind of tentative awards. So the PHA, or the Metro HRA right now, has language in our administrative plan that says that if the Metro HRA tentatively awards, or kind of gives you this award that says, yep, great, you've scored great on your application for PBVs, take this this award into your MHFA funding cycle and we wish you the best of luck. The Metro HRA requires that you receive and secure full financing by 12/31 of the year you receive your award from us. The Metro HRA has heard from developers that that's complicated, and there's many moving parts to getting a development through full financing. And so the Metro HRA will be proposing a change to this policy and updating our administrative plan to reflect 1 year after. So say you received an award in 2023, Metro HRA's requirement would be that you have received full financing by 12/31/2024. This, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. And we are not recommending that the award be open-ended for reasons that Terri had mentioned earlier, just because as of right now, when PBVs come onto contract, we're able to use those attrition vouchers or those turnover vouchers that Terri talked about to refill and lease up the PBVs when they're ready to start filling those vacancies. And we have historical data on turnover vouchers. Unfortunately, turnover vouchers and our attrition rate and our turnover rate is a variable that could change. We saw that from 2020 to 2021, we can see it at any point in time. So just want to be mindful of not leaving it open-ended, but certainly understand that the timeline should be longer. So we will be recommending a policy change, committee members and Chair Lilligren.
Okay, back to me. Thank you, staff. So in terms of the statewide rent assistance, one of the public comments was that we utilize the PBV option of the statewide rent assistance program. And I think that's a great consideration and something that we should consider, or you should consider as policymakers when the rules come out. The statute is very brief, or the language in the law is very brief on this, but we do know that the Minnesota legislative session this year commits $123 million to bring it home. Thank you again to our friends at Beacon who were big players in getting this passed through the legislature. So this new statewide rent assistance program could change the lives of thousands and thousands of low-income Minnesotans, and we're thankful for that, incredibly thankful to have this a resource coming our way potentially. The program could bring up to 5,000 new housing vouchers to the state, which would be administered by housing authorities like the Metro HRA. The legislative language includes a sentence that allows for PBV under this new program, but the rules for the program are currently unknown. Minnesota Housing, as I understand it, is in the process of hiring some folks to lead this effort. But the rules for the program aren't even written yet. So we don't know what it will look like. We don't know how many vouchers we're going to get. We don't know if they do allow project basing, what will that look like? Are they going to defer to the federal rules of, the federal project-based voucher program? Are they going to put additional rules on? Are they going to have preferences for certain populations? So we don't know anything about this other than what's in the statute. And so I think it's premature to have the conversation, other than I think it's a realistic expectation that you should all have of us as staff, is to bring forward another conversation on this when we know more about it and what it looks like. Not only the PBV portion, but the tenant-based portion of those new statewide rent vouchers. And I think some of the public comments indicate that the Metro HRA is going to get 1,000 of those. We've had someone guesstimate that. I don't know if that's accurate. We just really have no idea at this point. So at the point we know the rules, we'll be coming before you to have some conversation on, number one, do we want to apply for them, accept them? Do we want to PBV some of them? I mean, what are the parameters around that? But at the point we have additional resources, I think it makes a lot of sense to consider PBVing some of those. And I think the biggest thing as staff that we play with in terms of more PBV, HCV, is we're just balancing the scale one way or another, and we're not making an impact in assisting more families with the vouchers we have. With the statewide program, we will impact more voucher holders and more families if we get to the point of accepting those.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I have a question from Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many times in legislation, and I'll refer to transportation legislation that recently passed in Minnesota, the legislation will stipulate some timelines by which things have to be done. Is there any kind of a timeline in this legislation that says they have to have somebody hired and they have to have a plan together by a certain date?
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, no, but I was at a conference last week in Duluth with the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and their NARO, I'll just say NARO, hired a consultant to help work through the statewide rent assistance program and engage with Minnesota Housing on it in terms of program development, and has engaged with the housing authorities across the state. So I will be on a focus group when these rules are getting worked out, and I hope to be through that organization. But what I heard at the conference was that there's a July 1st of 2024 date, but I don't know what that means, nor did this consultant. Is that when there's no way the vouchers are going to be on the street by then, but I mean, but July 1st means something. Is that when the program guides have to be developed? Is that when the rules are together, so housing authorities know what their stake in the game is, sort of? So that's the only thing I know. I think the details are still being worked out, and so we'll share more when we know.
Thank you,
Well,
Councilmember.
and I'm guessing this is one more detail, thank you, Mr. Chair, that needs to be worked out, but there isn't a percentage that needs to go to Greater Minnesota and a percentage that needs to go to Metro. It's a statewide program.
Councilmember Vento and Chair Lilligren, it's the distribution, as I understand it, will be through the American Community Survey data.
Okay.
So according to need around the state, but it will be for the entire state. The metro area portion of the vouchers will be funded by the quarter-cent sales tax. And then outstate has a different source of funding that was committed by the legislature. And so that's what I know on that.
Councilmember Vento.
I just want to make a pitch for us to think statewide on this, not necessarily in our policy making, but in our hopes. A lot of people who are poor in the Twin Cities aren't choosing to come to the Twin Cities, but they are because that's where they hope to find some resources. And many of them, I think, would prefer to stay in their outstate communities, whether it be Wilmer, Minnesota, or Laverne, Minnesota, or Aurora Hoyt Lakes. But they can't, because there isn't housing there and there aren't support systems there. There's not transportation there, there's not the potential of jobs. So I hope that we remember to think of this beyond our 7-county metro area, and I just wanted to state that as another one of my prayers.
Well said. Thank you, Councilmember. Further conversation, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, as we expect to get some new housing vouchers from the state, we don't know how many we'll get, or, but I think the thing that I keep hearing are staffing constraints. And so that would mean that we would need to hire more staff, right? And do we have some strategies for providing some relief to the staff? I did hear someone suggest that maybe we advocate to the state to make the process easier so that we don't have staff doesn't have as much paperwork, but can you speak to that?
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, a couple of things. Yes, our staff is up to here. We're in the process. We gained approval to hire 4 new staff in the Housing Authority, a manager, a coordinator, which has a caseload, a sort of an audit function person, and then a financial analyst to help us with our work and our forecasting and all of these things. So we're thrilled and excited to bring these new folks on board. If the council commits to applying for, accepting, I don't know what the process will look like for getting these vouchers, we will need to hire staff. Each one of our staff currently has a caseload of about 425, is that about right?
Between 400 and 425.
Between 400 and 425. We know that's too much. We're hoping to provide some relief with the new hire, but knowing that if we get 1,000 vouchers, you can work the math backwards, and we'll have to do inspections and process payments and do all of those things. So we're going to have enough lead time to build our teams, not only the metro HRA, but housing authorities across the state, to be able to get these vouchers on the street and in use. So absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks. And Ms. Smith, I know you have one last slide about the schedule, and then we'll move into discussion. And if I would ask within the committee that we hear from pretty much everyone in their position. Councilmember Wolf kind of laid hers out. I feel like this is what staff needs from us, right? You need to know what we're thinking, and so that would be my request, that we kind of just go down the line, or folks jump in and kind of just share their thinking with staff and with the group. Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So this is the same slide we had earlier, but this is the timeline that we're looking at. So we'll be back to you with an action request 2 weeks from today that will then go to full council. So with that said, here are the 5 requests of us. And so I open the floor, Mr. Chair, for
Yeah,
questions or
thank you, Ms.
comments.
Smith, Ms. Paulson, and your teams. I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that underpins what you just presented to us, so thank you. Committee members, discussion, comments? Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Carter.
Well, thank you. I know we have had similar requests over the years. We've reviewed, the issues over the years, and some of them just keep popping up, or we haven't really resolved them. I feel like we need more advocacy at the state level, and maybe even at the federal level, to address some of our constraints and some of our barriers, and also to look at how to better utilize the talents and resources that we have at the Metropolitan Council. As Councilmember Wolf said, we are an administrator, so some of the things that we want, we don't have full control of. And it's really nice to have stakeholders and people who have the resources to focus, pushing for more housing. So that is, for me, I appreciate that. I appreciate having, organizations that are robust and pushing the needle and pushing the envelope and even pushing us to be the best that we can be. But we also could benefit, I think, from hearing, what else is being pushed. Obviously, we got some great legislature results this last session with the state rent assistance. And so if we can work together to get more legislation approved and more efficient in the work that we do, that would be great. If we could get more money for the tenant-based housing, so we don't have a 5-year waiting list, that would be great. And coming up with ways to develop more housing and being creative with that. I mean, I was just going on a walk and saying, wouldn't it be great if we could just have a place for people to store their clothing and their goods so they don't have to walk around with, 100 pounds on their back if they're looking for a house. There are some very simple, cost-effective, and creative solutions. And I appreciate having, a list of requests, because if you don't ask, you don't get. So it's refreshing to see that we have people in the community advocating so strongly for affordable housing.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for this information again today, and for continuing to build all our knowledge. And our investment, which already, of course, exists, is strengthened in understanding the many ways in which we are working to provide housing for people in our community, especially for those most in need. I'll reiterate the thanks that Councilmember Chambliss just gave to everyone here and to the entire community that understands the great need and is leaning in to help us as we examine those various areas to prioritize, yes, those areas most greatly in need. I do know that it would, were we to increase the percent of vouchers used as project-based vouchers, it could take us, because of what is currently in use, what becomes available on an annual basis, it could take us 2 to 3 years of just awarding project-based vouchers to get to that 30%. And I know that everyone in the audience right now feels we should probably, I can't say that everyone in the audience feels we should probably do that. I know that you're here to advocate for project-based vouchers today. And I also know that the hearts of everyone here reach out to everyone who needs a home. And so you know that there isn't one answer. There have to be multiple tools in our toolbox. In looking at what we have today and looking at what we may be looking forward to, who knows, in 2025, am of a mind to plan and to work together with you to understand what kind of resources we may have to apply in 2025. That doesn't mean to quit doing project-based vouchers today, but to look at every request that comes to us and to try to make certain that for those areas and developers who are working on projects for housing, to base people in homes that they need, that we try to support that. I do not want today to close off our ability to address a waiting list that has people waiting for a long, long time. And we can see those names and we know that, for the most part, when we contact them, we are able to provide assistance for that housing. We have a lot of stress in this decision-making. But as we are looking at an annual federal plan right now, a one-year plan, I cannot endorse with what I know today, making a jump to 30% based on the information that I've seen. I can endorse continuing to work with a community that cares and to ensure that we hear, especially from those who need housing, wherever they may be, to address a plan that will use additional resources that we may gain. I want to thank you again for all of the support to be here and to contact us and to help us understand what you know. But I also want to thank you for being here and hearing and listening to what is also known about other areas where housing is needed and the choices that we have to make to be sure that we're meeting the need as best we can and working together with you to advocate for additional resources to do more. I'm thankful for the recommendation also to extend the time period. And that makes really good sense to me, that we would partner more effectively with developers in the time that it takes them to get their projects funded. So that's where I am. I want to be able to do more and to do more in every area to support those who are tenant-based and to be able to get through that waiting list a lot faster and to be able to address youth and all who are in need of housing. So again, thank you. And I wish I could think better, do better, but that's where I am today.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsad. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And again, I offer my heartfelt thanks to all of you for showing up today and for sending probably a couple hundred emails that we got. Great job. You got your message out loud and clear, and it is really appreciated. And I learned a lot. Some of you wrote about your own personal experiences, and it was very moving, and I really did learn a lot. I also think about the folks on the waiting list, but not only the folks on the waiting list, I think about the folks that applied to be on the waiting list, and I think about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a year or so ago, there was around 11 to 12,000 people, give or take, of folks that applied to be on our waiting list and did not, and so, 9,000 or so did not even make it to the waiting list. And 3-4 years ago, when we did a joint opening with Minneapolis, we had 30 to 40,000 people apply just to get on the waiting list itself. And I think, council members, I think if you ask the general public, I think if you ask them, hey, if you qualify to get a housing voucher, you'd probably get the housing voucher, wouldn't you? And you could walk into Metro HRA and provide your income and your criteria, and you get that voucher, right? And then you could take it. I think that's how most people they'd probably say, yeah, that's probably how it works. But it doesn't work that way. You got to get on the waiting list in the first place. And I think that's abhorrent that so many people that qualify don't even make it to that point. So I've heard the word balance a lot, and I'm not sure if 14% is the right percentage, or 13% or 15%. But when I'm thinking about this process, I think about all of those people out there that are having housing instability. And I'm crossing my fingers that this new Bring It Home money, and again, thank you again for all of your advocacy, whether it's 1,000 vouchers or 800 or 1,200, whatever the amount might be, that we can have this conversation again. Because project-based vouchers, I've been to those communities, I've been to those apartment complexes. I live about a half a block from an apartment complex with project-based vouchers. I understand the valuable role that they play in our community. And so I look forward to having that conversation again in the year ahead or so, when we have a greater understanding of the rules, a greater understanding of the number of vouchers that we have, and we'll see where that takes us.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember. Thank you. Further discussion? Yeah, Councilmember Bento.
I want to thank my colleagues. This has been a great discussion. It's a pretty emotional one. But I especially want to add the thanks to the people who came here tonight. This is not an easy building to get to. You're taking precious time out of your Monday, and it's been a beautiful Monday, and it'd be a lot more fun to be out enjoying these fleeting days of fall after those sizzling days of summer. I also want to thank Terri and Stephanie. In addition to all the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, plus these presentations, plus the phone calls and requests they get emails from a really notorious member of this council who asks them the most inane questions about these issues. And the fact that they haven't gotten an automatic schism in their emails to just delete my emails is something I really appreciate. So for everything you've done to try and educate all of us, I just am deeply appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot to weigh in on the multi-year project-based voucher award, and I agree with the staff's recommendation on that, to give an extra year to get the funding.
Thank you. So I'll just weigh in quickly just in these summary public comment topics, and I'm going to go to the middle three because those are the easier ones to start with. And I think making them available across the 7-county metro region raises a lot of concerns for me about geographic equity. And Terri or Ms. Smith, I think you brought up the point of our area is statutorily defined for a reason. And so I wouldn't support that. We have a great response for coordinating the awards with the Minnesota Housing Super RFP, and I think that we're going in a good direction. It creates stronger applications for the Super RFP responses. The multi-year PVV award, I agree with Councilmember Wolf and others. I think that is a great reform to make and reflects the community's interests and comments. And I want to add my thanks to everyone who's been involved in this. And it isn't an easy conversation, as Councilmember Carr just said. We all want to do more, right? And we have limited tools here to do more with. And whether it's 20%, 30%, you know, which is the highest allowable, whatever that number is, you know, maybe we'll find it, but I think it was Councilmember Wolf who really raised in her earlier comments that it's kind of a new day, right, since the 2023 legislative session, and we don't know where things are going to land, and I think it's hard to make kind of a wholesale, massive change in policy while there are still so many variables in our immediate ecosystem, and good things, right? I think good things are going to happen because of what came out of the 2023 legislative session. We just don't know. And one of the things, and I know this isn't going to 30% or anything, but I think what I've heard is that affordable housing, especially deeply affordable housing advocates, are really in some ways seeking transparency, predictability in what we're doing. And so I've had some conversations with Director Barajas, there may be other staff involved in the conversations of some way of generating more of that transparency and predictability. And if it's to establishing formula or things that help us all understand. If these conditions are met, these vouchers could be made available for project-based awards. And so we've been noodling some of what that might look like. And again, I know it's not saying we're going to 30%, but at least we'd all have kind of a common vocabulary and common data. And I will say, and you know, thanks to Stephanie, thanks to Terri, to everyone, to the advocates especially, I think we all have a much deeper understanding of the dynamics of awarding project-based or tenant-based vouchers. It's complicated and it's very dynamic, and it's, you know, you can't just change one thing because it changes everything within the system. And so I am looking forward to what comes as the state rent assistance program gets rolled out, rules get made. But I think in this variable environment, I do not support going to a determined amount, whether, you know, at 30% or even at 20%. We go up to 20%. But I do support creating a more transparent and accountable sort of system of monitoring this, because it's so arcane. It's so hard to follow. I mean, we're so fortunate to have people like Terri and Stephanie who have such deep expertise in this and can break it down for us and for the communities. But it's complicated. And it's a fairly small tool overall, so. Thanks. Anyone else? Are you getting what you need here, Terri and Stephanie? And
Yes, I believe we have. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Appreciate your thoughts.
cool.
It's not an easy answer. There's no easy answer. And just to the folks that are here, I want to thank you as well. It's a tough issue, and we want more than anybody than to have an affordable home and a place to sleep that is safe for every single low-income person in this state, and we'll continue to do our work to get there. So thank you.
You're here. It's appreciated. Before we move on, anything else, committee members? Director Barajas, I didn't think we were going to get to this point this quickly, so I didn't know if we were going to move into the voucher holder residential preference study.
Mr. Chair, staff are here. We estimate about 20 minutes,
Okay.
if that's okay with
Is that
council
right?
members.
Great, let's do it. Well done. Ms. Gong, welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
This is your first time in front of the committee, huh?
As a researcher, yes.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here tonight. Nice to see you all.
Nice seeing you.
Mr. Chair, I'm excited to be here with my friend and colleague Sarah Gong, who's a researcher here at the council, to present this item. And She's a lot of the brains behind this, so I'm really only here to help set the stage for how we got here and sort of provide some of the history around this, but then Sarah will provide the specifics, and it's a joy to be here with you. So thanks for being with me today.
Likewise, Terry.
So the residential preferences study, this has been in the works for several years. I can think back to 2013 when we started talking about our mobility counseling program here at the council before the existing community choice program, but wanting to work with voucher holders to help them access neighborhoods where they want to live is what it's all about. And so that's sort of when all of these conversations first started. But you all know, and I don't need to go into detail on this, but the Housing Choice Voucher Program is a federally funded rent assistance programs where families pay 30% of their income and rent a unit, renting from a private landlord that's willing to accept the voucher. And very important that landlord participation is voluntary. We hope someday that will change, but for today, it's voluntary. In terms of where voucher holders live, I think this is always an important graphic that shows where voucher holders are currently living. And this is Metro HRA service area. And so some national research that I'm going to talk about next says that low-income families with vouchers live primarily in low-resource neighborhoods. And when they say low-resource neighborhoods, they're essentially saying high poverty neighborhoods, which we have some challenges with that, which is sort of how this study came about. But resource-rich neighborhoods really tend to offer abundant amenities in terms of access to high-quality schools, safe neighborhoods, and economic opportunities for the residents that live there. Does place matter? Where voucher holders, does that matter to them later in life? And according to some research, it does matter. There was some research that was released in 2015 that was conducted by Raj Chetty and Nathaniel Hendren out of Harvard. And there's a report out there, and I can send you a link to it. I should have put the link in here, but that children who grow up in lower poverty neighborhoods have better outcomes as adults in terms of increased income as adults, higher high school graduation rates, higher college attendance rates, lower incarceration rates for adult males, and less likely to be single-parent households. And so when this research first came out, the council initially had some conversations around implementing a mobility demonstration or a mobility counseling program to help voucher holders access neighborhoods that they have historically been excluded from. And so we understand that opportunity, and it's an important part of the narrative, which is why we're doing this study as well. An important part of the narrative is that opportunity means different things for every single one of us in this room. And what we want to help families do is access where they want to live and what opportunity means to them. But this research tells us that moving to better neighborhoods earlier in childhood improves children's outcomes in adulthood. And so we were building on that research by adopting that mobility counseling program.
Ms. Smith, I have
yes.
a question from Councilmember Carter.
Oh,
It
yes,
is
sorry.
a quick question.
Yes.
You know, when we look at data, quite often we find out when we break the data down, it looks different inside. And I am wondering if this is disaggregated for, in particular, communities of color. I'd like to know at some follow-up point if you have that information.
Ms. Smith.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Carter, absolutely, which is why we're challenging the narrative. And part of it is these are primarily white children that were growing up in the 80s, 1980s, and were followed for many years. And so when we adopted our current community choice program, it was one of the narratives that we challenged in the national definition of opportunity, because we know that a white child growing up in the 80s in a suburb is quite different from a person of color, a child of color growing up in the suburbs in 2023. So we recognize that fully, and it's been part of our conversations about all of these programs.
I'm thankful that you've already pointed out that potential difference. And if there is additional information about those breakouts, I greatly appreciate getting it. Or, you know, I could probably just go to the study, huh?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Carter, I can send some data to
All
you
right, thank
via email tomorrow. The other more recent research was conducted by, it was a randomized controlled trial conducted by Seattle and King County Housing Authorities in Washington. And under this program, it was set up a little bit different than our current community choice program, but offered some voucher holders a set of housing mobility related services and assisting them in moving to lower poverty areas in their region. And what the report indicates is that the service provisions provided to these voucher holders increase the number of families that moved into resource-rich areas. And there's data about how the families that moved with these services remain in new neighborhoods, and that the report found that the supports helped them achieve success in new neighborhoods. So we're sort of building on that, but we still are have some questions around that. And I think, again, important that opportunity means different things for each family. In terms of why voucher holders live where they live on that cluster map I showed you, why do they make the choices they make in housing location? And we learned some about this when the council issued the report, Choice, Place, and Opportunity back in 2014, and where we did some engagement with the region's residents around cluster mapping and preferences in terms of where they live. But we're hoping to build on that because we're wondering, do families prefer their current neighborhood due to other attributes of the neighborhood? Are families lacking information about the benefits of moving to other neighborhoods that they may not know about? Are families facing barriers that prevent them from moving to high opportunity neighborhoods? And so digging into that further, we know that voucher holders and all of us have varying preferences in housing location, but we make a lot of assumptions in terms of where people want to live. And we really want to stop making those assumptions and ask people, what are the trade-offs they're making? And so this research study sets out to say, where do voucher holder families live? Where do they want to live? If there are gaps in between them, how do we help fill those gaps as an agency? Do you have the Minneapolis partnership in your talking points? Okay, and so one more thing, we're partnering with Minneapolis Public Housing Authority and St. Paul Public Housing Authority on this study because recognizing that the residential preferences of voucher holders living in the suburbs may differ from those that are living in the core cities. We don't know the answer to that, so we're doing this as a collective research study between all three agencies. And so that is background for you on how we got here, and now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, Ms. Gong, who will dig into some of the details about the study itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for the context. Chair Lilligren, council members, thank you for having us here today. My name is Sarah Gong. I am a qualitative researcher in community development, and I will be taking us through the research background of this project today. So our HCV program serves a broad array of residents, and their needs are as diverse as they are. And so our primary goal for this research is to help housing choice voucher participants locate and move into units that meet their needs. To begin this, we conducted an extensive literature review, and I want to go over some key findings from our literature review. First is that people in mobility programs, including the Housing Choice Voucher Program, tend to prefer staying within their social networks. And so social networks provide comfort, familiarity, safety, and resources such as childcare and community connections and belonging. Participants in mobility programs tend to prioritize their children's well-being, safety, and again, children's well-being and safety can depend varying on who the family is, what their identity is, what their experiences are, and where they live. And accessibility to amenities is another large factor. Amenities include transit routes, places of worship, cultural grocery stores, etc. And finally, there are push and pull factors. So factors that might push a family out of their current place of residence or factors that might pull them into a new area. We also found that all around and overall preferences are not satisfied within mobility programs. This includes the Housing Choice Voucher Program. One of the primary studies that we looked to as we conducted our literature review and designed our own study was tracking choice in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the relationship between neighborhood preferences and locational outcomes. This was a study conducted in 2018. And while this study took place in Jackson County, Florida, the findings and research design still resonated with Metro HRA and CD research. The preferences of Jackson County Mobility Program participants were categorized by two dimensions, location and personal, and all around the study found that 60% of participants could not satisfy any location preferences, and only 4% of participants found places that met both their dimensions of locational and personal preferences. And in this literature review, we also found that there are assumptions from policymakers that I would like to go into here. So this was a study from 2020. It's called False Assumptions About Poverty Dispersal Policies. And this study found that well-intentioned policymakers make three key assumptions about low-income household decisions. The first is people living in poverty make decisions in a hierarchical manner that considers neighborhoods before other concerns. The second is that when giving a choice, people living in assisted housing choose to move away from familiar neighborhoods. And the third assumption is when giving a choice, people living in assisted housing will all understand opportunity the same way, behave the same, and make opportunity moves. Despite these assumptions, Metro HRA and CD research understand that housing solutions are not one size fits all, as the stated assumptions imply. Thus, we intend to use this research to challenge assumptions. We intend to use the collected data to identify the residential preferences of voucher holders and the factors that shape their residential choices, identify the gap between these residential preferences and where they actually live, and finally, identify and mitigate factors that limit the residential choices of Metro HRA voucher holders. I want to highlight limitations for voucher holders identified in our literature review. They can be placed into roughly two categories, forced moves and personal factors. So forced moves, as defined by a study we reviewed in 2019, is when a participant is focused on escaping current situations rather than searching for the options best matching preferences within the budget. Things that could constitute as a forced move is when their decisions are constrained by time, money, access, or knowledge of services or inability to access markets, and limited affordability with budget constraints and high security deposits. Personal factors include discrimination. As Terri referred to, it is the landlord's choice whether or not they want to accept a voucher, and so landlord behavior has been consistently found to be a large limitation for voucher holders. Racism was also, unfortunately, a key factor here. The studies that we reviewed pointed to particularly Black and Latina participants experiencing racism and discrimination. Participants also want to stay within their social networks. They prefer to stay within their established communities, and these established communities play a key role in the search processes for finding and determining houses and units that voucher holders would like to reside in. And finally, there are unit-based factors. So family composition, are they a multi-generational household with children, parents, and grandparents? Are they a single-family household? How many units do they need? What is the placemaking ability? What is the ability to make the unit their own? Can they hang up things for worship, pictures to make it feel like home? And finally, disability accommodations. For example, we spoke to a voucher holder in the Metro HRA program who has limited visibility, and they spoke about needing requirements of having an elevator because they are legally blind. And so that can also place a strict parameter around their choices. And so these limitations have been important to consider as we developed our research questions. Our research questions are 4 primary questions with each with 2 subset questions. Our first question is, what characteristics do voucher holders seek in their neighborhoods? This includes both tangible and intangible characteristics. Our second one is, what characteristics do voucher holders seek in their new home units? Again, both tangible and non-tangible. Our third question is, to what extent do voucher holders feel able to satisfy their preferences? What trade-offs do people make when deciding where to live, and what barriers keep voucher holders from satisfying said preferences? And finally, what kinds of support, services, or policies would help close the gaps between where people want to live and where they currently live? So how can the Metropolitan Council and housing authorities provide such support? And what would a voucher holder need to avoid needing a voucher in the first place? Our research uses mixed methodology. We are collaborating with a consultant, external and internal advisory groups and external stakeholders. We will have a survey, which includes a pilot and follow-up interviews for feedback. We will have focus groups, which also includes a pilot and will be conducted in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse voucher holders. And finally, we will have in-depth individual interviews that offer avenues for other methods of preferred communication beyond verbal communication. So now I will hand it back over to Terri to discuss timelines and deliverables.
Thank you, Sarah. Great job. One of the things I didn't do in the beginning, shame on me, was to thank the folks and the brain people behind this. Besides Sarah, Matt Schroeder, who's a researcher also in the research department. I just messed up his title.
He's
He's
a
not here.
principal researcher.
Principal researcher. And then Baresh Gumas-Das, who's also here, was part of our initial conversations. And so I want to thank them because we collectively talked about this, but they're really the brains behind this. And Baresh is the project manager that's working with a consultant. So she's done lots and lots of work on this. So in terms of status, partly having the time frame is less important to us than having this done right. And so our time frames have been a little bit delayed from the initial contract and deliverables, but we have done stakeholder engagement with the consultant. The survey design is nearly complete, and that was last week, so it may even be complete by now. Survey collection will happen in Q4 of 2023, so we're intending to survey, I think it was 360 participants from each of the 3 agencies. Interviews will be conducted. Focus groups will be completed. They're aiming for 25 to 30 focus groups amongst the agencies to collect information that couldn't be gathered in the survey. And then they'll spend a significant chunk of time on data analysis and then issue a findings report that we're excited to get. And this isn't a perfect process. I'm not aware of any research that's been done like this across the country, so I think it'll be helpful to inform our work in terms of where people want to live and how we can get them there. And I think will be informative from a national standpoint as well. So we're excited to get the findings report, and certainly we'll be back to share that with you. And we hope we learn valuable information, which we think we will. So, and we're happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks. And before I look to committee members, I do have a quick question, Ms. Gong, about the survey design. And have you been able to test any of the questions? I'm just wondering what the response is to the questions. They look great. This whole project looks great. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your question. Again, it's great to be here. Regarding testing the questions, so we will issue a pilot survey, and so that will offer us an opportunity to look at what the initial responses are, if any questions are posing or creating confusion for participants, and then we will have an interview process with our survey pilot participants to get their feedback. How did the survey go? Review their answers to the questions, and then incorporate their feedback into our survey. So we have yet to collect the data from the pilot survey, but we will have that once the pilot survey has concluded.
Great, thanks, Ms. Gong. Oh, yeah, Director Barajas.
I would offer to thank you, Mr. Chair, that the research questions on slide 12 are not the survey questions. They're what we're trying to ask, but the questions we ask of residents will be trying to get at these questions,
Okay.
but these aren't what we were going to ask
All
them.
right, that kind of answers my next question. Thank you. I won't ask it then. Now, further discussion, Councilmember Carter, Wolf, and then Chambliss. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you very, very, very much for this work toward understanding the needs and barriers and opportunities perhaps for voucher holders in their choice of places to live. I wonder if you can tell me what class of voucher holders, class is a bad word, or what category of voucher holders this invitation will apply to. If you can talk about your goals for numbers of participants and perhaps anything in the design of the research that provides motivation, incentive, reward around the housing issue for the participants that would come forward.
I can't speak to the
latter.
like, specific numbers. I think you are more versed in that. However, I could speak to more about the motivations and some key considerations that we have as we further engage with the voucher holders. I'll let Terry respond to the question about specific numbers. But
Sure. Mr. Chair and Councilmember Carter, for the survey, we're hoping to survey, I'm looking at Brush, 360 voucher holders from each agency. For focus groups, they're hoping to have 25 to 30 focus groups with, we're still negotiating with the consultant, but 5 to 7 people in each focus group, and then in-depth interviews with 30 voucher holders across the agencies. And what we've struggled, we spent a considerable amount of time what the consultant called inclusion and exclusion conversations in terms of which population of voucher holders. Families with children, individuals, people with disabilities, aging in place, people that are prior homeless, people of color, white voucher holders. And so we spent a considerable amount of time such that we hope that we can capture a variety of voucher holders to gain insight from. And we'll do targeted outreach to make sure that we get voices from all of the voucher holding population in our results, because we understand that the preferences of people of color versus white people, or people that are prior homeless versus more stabilized, are going to be different. So we're going to try to capture a variety. And Barish, I welcome you up if you want to add anything.
I think you covered everything.
Thank you, thanks.
And Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, I'd like to add that we also are offering compensation and as incentives to the mobility program participants who choose to participate in the study. And another key consideration that we have been upholding all throughout the design of this research is that we want to be very conscious of the inherent power dynamic between us as the Metro HRA and them as HRA voucher recipients. We have made it very clear and will continue to make it very clear that their participation or lack thereof will have no bearing on their receiving of a voucher. And we are also taking care to ensure that they don't feel threatened and mitigating any potential imbalances between us.
Great.
Does that include discussion facilitators who are community participants?
That is correct.
All right. And what was the number you mentioned around focus groups? And I have one further comment, forgive me.
We are still Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, we are still negotiating the exact number of focus groups. However, we would like to shoot for about 25 to 30 focus groups with approximately 5 to 7 participants per focus group. And again, this number is still up for negotiation.
And that sounds like a really decent goal in terms of the focus groups. I find that, and I think you likely have as well, that given the limited time for individuals and the scattered kind of approach of surveys, sometimes your best really grouping could be in target groups of that 5 to 7 or so, especially if they are led by community participants or peers of a sort. And so I'm looking forward to hearing the information that you're going to get. I certainly appreciate the dedicated approach that you are taking. And this is so very important. It absolutely, applies a lot to the discussion that we have just had and many that we will have in the future to have this really good source of information. Thank you again. Look
Thank you,
forward to the
Councilmember.
report.
Councilmember Wolf, and Councilmember Lindstrom, and Councilmember Vento.
Thank you,
Councilmember Wolf.
Mr. Chair. I look forward to getting this information. I think it will be very helpful in our decision makings. It would be nice if we had a more broad, not just voucher holders, to help us for our overall regional planning, knowing why people want to live. Because, you don't have to be a voucher holder to be constrained in your choices on where you live.
That's an excellent point. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, and I really appreciated the opportunity to take a deep dive into this research and looking even at what people's assumptions were, because there's been a lot of discussion about choice and opportunity. We had a lot of research that was done, I think, in 2014 or 2016. So, I'm not sure if there's a plan to close that gap or to get another look at what we looked at before when we talked about choice, place, and opportunity, because we moved into a lot of different directions. But I don't know that we looked at all of the assumptions that people were making when we produced that information. And hearing the personal factors is so critical, and the forced moves, because that has been a part of the history, in America, in the state of Minnesota, where, in some cases being well-meaning and maybe other cases not so well-meaning, it can still have an impact. So that personal choice and those personal factors can really impact how successful we are with the housing choice vouchers and the project choice vouchers, because we've heard stories about the barriers and some of the constraints with either the people that live in the building with the project-based vouchers, or landlords, or associations. So all those factors do come into play, so I'm glad to see that. And also, just looking forward to hearing more about this very important work. Personally, I know what it's like to be in a new place where you don't have those social connections. And it was refreshing to see that it's not always about, the dollars. If you can have both, you can have enough money to live in a way that is dignified. I know, some folks don't like that word, but you want a place that's healthy and whole, and that includes, and the well-being also includes those social factors, your cultural factors, and, just looking at this and getting this information out is what's important, because we can have the data, but if other people are not seeing the data and being able to utilize this as we make policy decisions outside of the Met Council, then, we're limiting the opportunity. Like she said, it's not just about project-based vouchers, Councilmember Wolf. It's about, the choices that people make for their housing or their life in general.
Thank you. Well said, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
I think Councilmember Lindstrom was first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Said my name, but I didn't raise my hand. But if I have the floor, I'll happy to
Psychically
oblige.
detected. Did you, Councilmember
I'd be
Lindstrom?
happy to.
Oh,
Yeah, and then I'll pass
Okay.
I'll pass it on to Councilmember Vento, but yeah, I'm so looking forward to when this is completed, to be like, wow, we were assuming this
yeah.
thing in our program, and maybe we ought to take a second look at that. That's number one. Number two, this is so fascinating. Is there an opportunity for area universities to be engaged with this research in some way, shape, or form? I'm sure confidentiality considerations and many considerations, but it just seems like some U of M students or some students from someplace could sink their teeth into this and help us in some way.
Ms. Gong.
Oh,
Either one of you.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Councilmember Lindstrom, thank you for your question. So that would be something we would have to further discuss with the consultants that we are collaborating with. However, regarding further opportunities to be engaged, I do want to share that we are, to Councilmember Chambliss and Carter's points, we will be looking for facilitators who are from specific communities that are highly represented in the voucher program in the Metro HRA. This includes Somali, Hmong, disabled, and I believe the fourth one is African American. And so the University of Minnesota would be an excellent place to start looking. We know that the consultants do have a staffing plan that has yet to be fleshed out. However, we know that the cultural liaison role that I just described, or the facilitator, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The facilitator role that I just described is one that we will be looking for. And so I think a university would be an excellent place to start. As far as having students involved, I'm not so sure about that. We do have a pretty tight contract between us and the consultants we are working with and a pretty tight internal council team, but that could certainly be something we look into. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I might just add one thing to that is that Metro HRA is in conversations with the U of M researchers at this point about the success of housing choice voucher holders and digging into the success rate of voucher holders in terms of placing their vouchers. So it's sort of linked to this. And so we are having some conversations. I also think, to your point, Councilmember Lindstrom, when we have results of this study, it will be important information to share nationally because it can inform other research across the country. And so I think to that end, we'll want to share it far and wide, assuming that we believe it's valid research. And I'm not a researcher, but we have brilliant researchers here at the council, and we're lucky to have them, so.
No, I agree, Ms. Smith and Ms. Gong. It seems like it's a little bit of a sea change almost in our perceptions, that this research could really inform a lot of perspectives on these issues. Further discussion, Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This may be evidence that I need either a cognitive test or a hearing test, or possibly both, but I'll think about this and email you if I don't ask the question now. So to spare you that, Terry, when you say 360, is that 360 per Minneapolis, per St. Paul, per Metro?
Correct.
Great. I just wanted to be, got it.
And if, just to clarify, Mr. Chair, if we don't get the full 360, then we'll supplement with additional Metro HRA voucher holders because we recognize it's a heavy lift for our partner agencies to reach out. Data privacy reasons we can't just give the consultants a list of people. So the housing authorities have to be involved in the outreach, and so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your people who are leading the discussion groups. I think it's important also to get people who have faced challenges in their lives, because like, just because you're Somali, you could have been wealthy in Somalia and wealthy here, and you might not have any connection to the subject. So making sure that those people that you're matching up have had some challenges in their lives will probably make for better conversations than somebody who's not had challenges.
Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Wolf, thank you for your comment. That is certainly something we will be looking for because you're right, just based on identity alone, that doesn't tell us the whole story. So we will be certainly looking for facilitators who can guide us in cultural responsiveness as well as familiarity with housing challenges as you described.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Further questions or discussion? I think this is just really exciting. So congratulations, Ms. Gong, to your whole team, Ms. Smith as well. And I look forward to about mid-year, it looks like we'll see the results. Good luck. Let us know how we can be supportive. But I think this is sort of a new day, right? Sort of new groundbreaking territory in our research. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Director Barajas, anything? Michelle, anything? Okay, seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.